Mr. Thompson here. We're looking at U.S. History Standard 5, investigate specific events and key ideas that brought about the adoption and implementation of the United States Constitution. More specifically, we're zooming in on Part C of that standard, explaining the key features of the Constitution, including the Great Compromise, limited government, and the Three-Fifths Compromise. The new United States Constitution was written by state delegates who met in Philadelphia from May through September 1787 at the Constitutional Convention. The original purpose of the convention was to revise the flawed Articles of Confederation, but soon the decision was made to create a new government structure. The meetings were kept private among the delegates until the details had been worked out and a final draft was ready to be sent to the states for ratification. The group of 55 delegates chose George Washington to preside over the convention. Throughout the summer of 1787, the delegates debated different plans for the new government framework that put states and groups against one another. The compromises that were negotiated during the Constitutional Convention became the basis for the United States Constitution. Despite the fact that most delegates to the Constitutional Convention believed that the government designed by the Articles of Confederation had to be replaced, most still feared a strong central government. To reassure people that the new government would not be too powerful, the framers of the Constitution created a limited government with divided powers. The framers were greatly influenced by the ideas of the French political thinker Montesquieu. Powers were divided in two ways in the new government. First, power was divided between national and state governments. Second, power in the federal government was shared between three branches. The power of the executive branch was weakened because it was shared with the legislative and judicial branches. For example, the legislature can override a presidential veto of a bill, and the Supreme Court can rule that a bill signed by the president is unconstitutional. This safeguard against an abuse of power gives each branch of government a way to check and balance the power of the other branches. Hey, what you trying to do? You trying to pull a fast one on us? You think your branch is more powerful than ours? I don't think so. It's like an epic game of rock, paper, scissors between the different branches. And who doesn't love a good rock, paper, scissors match? Even though the delegates unanimously believed in the limited government approach to creating the new government structure, there were significant issues between the delegates when ironing out the details. One great issue facing the delegates to the Constitutional Convention was deciding how to divide up representation in the new government's legislature. Under the Articles of Confederation, each state had one vote, which put all states on equal footing regardless of population. States with large populations wanted more influence in government, so they supported James Madison's proposal known as the Virginia Plan. Under Madison's proposed government plan, representation in the nation's legislature would be proportional to each state's population. Thus, states like Virginia would have greater representation and voting power in the federal legislature. Virginia's population in 1797 was the largest of any state, with approximately 692,000. The next closest state in terms of population was Pennsylvania, with approximately 494,000. Virginia and other large states believed it was appropriate for them to have a stronger voice in making policy than a small state like Delaware with a population of only 59,000 people. They're like, hey, we got more people, so we need to have more of a say. So Delaware, hush. No one listens to you, Delaware. You only have 59,000 people. Delaware's all like, States with smaller populations were reluctant to give up that equality they had with larger states under the structure of the Articles of Confederation. To counter Madison's Virginia plan, the small states supported the New Jersey plan, which featured a legislative branch where all states were equally represented. Essentially, the New Jersey plan would have maintained the government structure from the Articles of Confederation, but expanded the powers Congress would have over the states. The results of the two proposals was a divided constitutional convention in which the large states and the small states both fought for legislative power. Compromise was essential for the Constitutional Convention to succeed in satisfying the different viewpoints on the framework of the new government. Delegates to the Constitutional Convention settled the issue of representation in Congress by approving the Great Compromise. This compromise helped save the Constitution by settling the dispute between states with large populations and states with small populations. The compromise called for the creation of a legislature with two chambers, a bicameral legislature. There would be a House of Representatives in one chamber with representation based on population. The second chamber would be a Senate with equal representation for all the states. Proposed legislation had to achieve a majority vote by both chambers before being passed on to the newly created executive branch to be signed into law. The issue of slavery was another controversial issue that divided the delegates at the Constitutional Convention. Though slavery existed in all states, southern states depended on slave labor because their economies were based on producing cash crops. When it became clear that states with large populations would have more representatives in the new national government, states with large slave populations demanded that they be allowed to count their slaves as part of their population. Northern states resisted. Both sides compromised and agreed to the 3/5 compromise in the final plan for the new government. The 3/5 compromise allowed states to count 3/5 of their slaves when calculating their entire population. Also, to protect the practice of slavery, states with large numbers of slaves demanded that the compromise include provisions for the new government to allow the continuation of the slave trade for 20 years, and northern states have to return runaway slaves to their owners. The debate and negotiations concerning the key issues of representation, limited government, and slavery lasted through the summer of 1787. 39 of the 55 delegates signed the final draft of the United States Constitution on September 17th, 1787. The proposed constitution was then sent to each state for ratification at state conventions. That wraps up Standard 5, Part C, explain the key features of the Constitution, including the Great Compromise, limited government, and the 3/5 compromise.